Thank you all for coming out in the February meetup. We're very excited, and thank you for all your support for the Urbanist. We're a donor and volunteer-powered organization that examines urban policy to improve cities and quality of life. If you'd like to donate and support our work or volunteer, please reach out at info@urbanist.org. It's through your support and reader support that we have been able to hire a part-time executive director and managing editor in the last few years and really grow our readership and our reach. And it's been really great. And you have been more than generous, and we appreciate it. I also want to plug a couple upcoming events. Our January 6th meetup will be a legislative preview with Representative Macri and Senator Saldana. I think it's a short session, but there is lots of important legislation that people will be trying to get through this year. So it should be a really interesting meetup. Then our February 8th meetup will be featuring Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce President and CEO Rachel Smith, talking about Seattle economy, the chamber, what it does, how it fits into our urban politics. So that should be great as well. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to the Urbanist own Ryan Packer and Dongho Chang.
Thank you, Patrick. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ryan Packer. I'm a senior editor at the Urbanist and a transportation reporter. And I'm really excited that we have Dongho Chang here. Dongho Chang spent almost the last entire decade as Seattle's city traffic engineer. Prior to that, he was the city traffic engineer in the beautiful city of Everett, Washington for 5 years before that, and spent 15 years at the Washington State Department of Transportation before that. Now he's back at WSDOT, where he'll be taking on the role of state traffic engineer. As city traffic engineer, Dongho has served under 5 mayors, 3 confirmed SDOT directors, and more than a few interim ones. I think that for a lot of people, Dongho's Twitter feed, a direct view into the sites he's visited to check on the small ways that Seattle is making a transportation system more accessible, sustainable, more in line with the ideals that embody the direction that Seattle's leaders say that we should be heading in. But of course, apart from the direct feed, what we don't see is his day-to-day work on the policies that put those things into practice. As Tom Fogluro of the Seattle Bike Blog put it in his profile earlier this year to mark Dongho's transition from city to state, Seattle is a better city because of Dongho Chang. Earlier this year, when I was filling in for Tom at the Bike Blog, one day we got a tip about a concerning situation along a protected bike lane in the U District, and I got on my bike to head over there. A few minutes after I got to the scene, Dongho walked up himself to check out what was going on to see with his own eyes. I feel like that's a pretty standard story when it comes to Dongho. So really excited to have him here. But I feel like I'm going to just start with the obvious question, which is a lot of people are wondering, what made you leave us at the city and go to the state? It seems like a lot of people would probably think, your job is pretty amazing at the city, getting to see all the amazing things we're doing. So what prompted that change, I think, is a question on a lot of people's minds.
So Ryan, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I'm still a resident in Seattle. Love my city, love the community, and really proud of the team at SDOT. So what prompted my change is what's happening right now. You're seeing the consequence of our action, which is an inaction, which is huge inequity in people who are outside the vehicle. You're just walking around, right? I don't know if you get the pressure sometimes, like I gotta give myself a little more space, and maybe there's a sidewalk, maybe there isn't, and our physical space in United States is set up not for people. It's set up for a mode that we use for a peak hour. That's its design, and then when it's not, we see the consequence of that policy approach. And we're in Washington State seeing the highest fatality rate in the last 10 years, 611 people so far this year, 2021. It's staggering. It hurts just thinking about my profession and how we have not really taken that seriously. And so I left because I feel like I can make a difference in the policies and the guidelines that we follow. That has been very one-sided. We have a amazing opportunity right now with the national level with Secretary Buttigieg, looking at how to make our physical infrastructure much better than what it has been. He's has an incredible team that's going to provide the policy and the resources. And in our state, we have a governor who is very focused on the environment and sustainability. We have a secretary of transportation who is, just understands the dynamics. And so I feel very lucky to be serving at this time, and then even just being given the opportunity to work at the state level. I left the state. I would say that the group that I was working in for that 15 years was probably one of the best times. We were trying as a operations team, making changes on our infrastructure without widening in order to make improvements, safety improvements, efficiency improvements, all those things, signal timing, right meters, providing information to the public. But I think the consequence was that, sometimes when you do those things, it actually doesn't really improve the long-term policy end of it. And now working in Seattle and seeing what we can do, and some of the things that we're not able to do as a profession, it really has to do with how do we provide that national guidance. So MUTCD is one. It's the national guidelines for traffic control devices. Huge opportunity to make some changes so that it serves the communities better. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to really look at uniformity is really great on really high-speed facilities, freeways, but in urban environments, maybe that needs to change. So, the amount of feedback is unprecedented on that, on the proposed changes, and that engagement is incredible. It just tells us how important people feel our built environment should change in order to provide that flexibility for people's space. We're having that conversation in Seattle, and we see that right now, where again, it's just walking in our residential street and feeling like sometimes that one encounter makes you very discouraged, that it makes you feel like the environment and the way that we set up really wasn't for the human interaction. And so, how do we change that paradigm? I think all those things is an opportunity for me to really try to change as I can. I think I'm at a point where with the state DOT, just looking at our safety and what we're seeing, there's a really strong impetus from the Traffic Safety Commission to really change, how we approach safety. We have a safety expert in the state DOT who leads the nation in trying to change how we design our streets so that it's a safe systems approach. And I have a chance to work in that environment. So if I didn't apply and leave the city and have this opportunity to be involved and be able to help make some of those policy changes and design changes and attitude changes a reality for communities, I think I would really be disappointed in myself. And so even though I feel like I think I could have retired and had the most amazing experience working at the city, I feel like I would have felt like I didn't really try, and would kick myself if I didn't at least attempt to get involved at the national level, so that these tools and these policies can be really discussed nationally, and that we change that paradigm.
And so I'm wondering if you can give us a little more specifics in terms of the direction that you are trying to push the state in, and particularly, we see in Seattle, there's a reflection on the exact same trend that you're talking about. And a lot of those incidents are on state controlled roads like City Way, Aurora. And I think a lot of people are really frustrated that it just seems to take so long for really any changes to happen at all on those places. And it seems like a lot of people's perception, and I think this is actually reflected in state legislators as well, is that it's just infighting between the city and the state in terms of passing the buck. So I'm really curious you can give us a little bit more detail in terms of how we can move that forward.
So I would say one additional thing, Ryan, is that the way that we are looking at the streets and also how we are investing in infrastructure, I think we still need to talk about pedestrians, sidewalks, how we fund and maintain sidewalks. So I don't want to lose that thread. That I know that the changes in the roadway is important, and so one of the things that I think that we all do in terms of we understand that the policies and the directions that we have worked in the past probably isn't the best approach. We design for a peak hour and say, okay, this 1 hour or 1.5 hour, 2 hours, we see this rush of use. And so we should analyze and maybe project out X number of years so that when we do any kind of improvements, we don't have to come back and address it in the future, so that it's much more of a holistic approach. And that's really put us in this condition where, we have a lot of capacity for majority of the day that's not utilized. And then during the peak, you might have a little bit of congestion, and that is really the opposite of how we really want to approach it. Congestion. Sometimes it's really good. It really shows that things are thriving when you have those kind of conditions where there is faster speed and driving that's aggressive. It takes away from really the experience of people that are living there, people who are walking, people who are taking transit, and it's not sustainable long term. What we're seeing is that we can't even maintain the infrastructure that we have, and as we build more and expand, it becomes more of a burden for society. And then we're also seeing that in terms of the impact to our climate and our earth. We're seeing intense storm events that are really devastating for communities. We're seeing the consequences of sea level rise that's being experienced in our state, where our tribes on the coast is relocating just because they're experiencing repeated flood events, and so I think it's dire for us to really have a conversation about these roadway that's built. They can be repurposed. They can be, we could test things out, right? And so I would say, let's stop pointing fingers. Let's start working together and see how we can get to the right approach and solution so that we get the environment that we really need for our communities. And the conversation that's happening, or right now, like city ways, all those streets, I think could be applicable for the entire nation. So I think it's great to be part of the conversation now. Being at the state, I'm able to be part of that dialogue. One of my responsibility is to provide policies, operational policies, working under the secretary, and the approach that the secretary really wants us to look at is practical solutions, looking at that cohesive and a community dialogue. And then we're really interested in providing solutions that, that's more than just transportation, right? So that those things that can enhance economy, that enhance safety, that works for broader just than moving vehicles. We also know that we have to rely on pedestrians and bicycles and people who are riding transit, we all as a transportation mode are walkers. And so if we make conditions such that it's difficult for people to walk, then we exclude that mode. And I think that's one of the things that I'm really interested in and trying to improve upon. How do we build, build our infrastructure and modify our conditions at locations so that if someone does make an error, that it's not going to be catastrophic, that someone's going to get seriously injured or killed. Those are really, really critical items. And so the numbers are telling us that we're going the wrong direction, and we really have to pivot and change, change how we are approaching transportation. And I'm also really encouraged at my role. I'm able to have a really good dialogue with our federal partners, and the approach that they're asking me is, what is the how do we change this these safety numbers, right? So so that when we're proposing projects and when we're working on projects, it's going to make a difference, because those safety dollars are very small compared to other dollars. And so we have to make it very effective. We want to utilize those tools that are proven countermeasures, that are effective, that we can repeat, and we can do it in a way that's really equitable and sustainable.
You talk about the comparison between the dollars for safety and the dollars for other projects. The Secretary of Transportation, Roger Millar, has talked about how congestion, it's cost our state money, but the economic impact from impactful crashes in our state is like 4 times the amount of congestion. But the lawmakers focus on, the lawmakers who choose projects focus on projects that will reduce congestion, and there's not really a whole lot of consideration of safety at that time. So it seems like there's a disconnect between selecting projects that get built statewide and integrating a safety approach at that time, as opposed to having to come back later and fix what was already done. So I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on that from the level of the state and city DOT.
Yeah, I think Secretary Millar on its State of the State address showed, congestion annually costs about $4.5 billion in our state. But safety consequences of crashes is about $14.7 billion to society. So it's a significant in terms of impact to people in our state. And any safety improvements that we can do, it actually helps with congestion. If you think about a consequence of a collision, you have to have responders come and aid people who are hurt. Those incidents cause congestion as well. They're not predictable, and so I think we can improve reliability by improving safety, by reducing the number of collisions and the severity of these collisions. We make our system much more predictable, and I think it's much more humane in terms of how it operates. So it is really up to us, our department, to provide that data, that case, and show how we can spend safety dollars so that we could actually make our system more reliable for our traveling public, and how we can move our goods in a reliable and efficient manner, but that no one's going to get hurt, right, as a consequence. That's really the critical element. So that's something that Secretary is providing in those facts and data, right? And then we can show with our responses, that these safety improvements have consequences for improving reliability and carrying capacity of our transportation systems that we all depend on.
You mentioned the State Traffic Safety Commission, which is, it's admittedly a very separate entity from the DOT, and that can have positive aspects and negative aspects. But I think a lot of people have noticed that the approach from that body is sort of very enforcement oriented, enforcement and education oriented. And there's not a lot of, it doesn't seem there's a lot of integration with the engineering leg of the so-called 4Es, despite the fact that Washington's had a Target Zero program for over 2 decades now. That was ostensibly, came from the Vision Zero of the Scandinavian countries. And so I'm very curious what you think about, particularly I think in Seattle, we're starting to see a shift away from those E's, education and enforcement, particularly the enforcement, I think. But that shift is slower going at the state level.
Yeah, I think for the Traffic Safety Commission, there's a recognition that engineering has to be primary. So you're seeing some of that shift happening with the latest report. If you read through the report, that the safe systems approach, that design is critical. That is explicit now. So you'll see that in the report. We're working with Shelley Baldwin, the director of Traffic Safety Commission, on how are we going to get to our target, right? Which is no one getting hurt and seriously injured or killed on our system. And so it's incumbent upon both agencies to work together. I feel very lucky to have been part of a team that looked at the safety for pedestrians and bicycles as part of the Cooper-Jones Active Transportation Council. Again, that body, a group of volunteers who and experts who are providing just insight on how we can improve safety for people who are outside the vehicle. So if you are able to take a look at their annual report and the recommendation to the legislature and the governor, you'll see some, very, I would say, game-changing suggestions on how we get to that zero, which is one is the speed. We have to make sure that where we have a roadway with where there's vulnerable users, we have to make sure that the roadway operates and that drivers are driving at a speed that's going to be survivable if there is someone makes a mistake. And so that's that target speed. That's part of the Seattle's really approach to the Vision Zero, and that street typology and that operating speed is really important, and that we engineer our infrastructure so that we get that behavior and that operation where if someone does make this mistake, it's not catastrophic. So, and I would also say that the conversation is happening nationally. There is, again, really an emphasis at the national level and Federal Highway Administration recognizing that we have to engineer our infrastructure, our streets, so that they are operating so that again it's forgivable, and that that we have a roadway system that's going to get to that safety.
I know a lot of people perceive WSDOT as a very car oriented. But there are other divisions at WSDOT, particularly active transportation, and I am curious if you can talk a little bit about the work that you see happening to sort of promote those other modes within the department.
Yeah, so we have our active transportation division led by Bart Chamberlain. Amazing team, a small but mighty, and they are leading the charge to make sure that our department is integrating all modes, especially people who are walking and biking, into our transportation plan and how we implement new projects. So, and of course, they just published the second part. So again, I encourage you to read the active transportation plan. It's a game changer in terms of how Department of Transportations have traditionally planned and designed and operated for people who are outside vehicles. I think we will be one of the leading agencies in terms of providing a safe and more comfortable facility for people walking and biking.
We dove right into the weeds of this conversation, I feel like, in terms of the traffic safety that literally impacts every one of our lives every single day. And so I think it's worth spending a lot of time on. But I know a lot of people discovered even the role of the city traffic engineer at Seattle through you and your Twitter account, and sort of the way that you're able to to show people the city that they live in, or maybe even don't live in. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how you sort of gain that following in terms of, I actually, this afternoon, I went back and looked at, I tried to find your first tweet, but it was from, I think you joined in 2013, but it was sort of not a lot of, it was like, sort of professional development stuff. And so I was kind of trying to pinpoint the exact moment where you kind of realized what you could actually do with your Twitter account. So I'm really curious to hear from you on that one.
Yeah, Ryan. So I started my social media to really get engagement from my peers. Institute of Transportation Engineers for our Washington State section, very active. We were trying to recruit and get interest from young professionals because again, it's such an important important area for getting diverse perspectives. And so initially it was just to promote our association's meetings and things that were happening, also discuss like tools. But then I realized that people had some interest on on some of the project particulars, and so I think that was a recognition. It's like, hey, we can actually get interest not just in Seattle, but our entire state, and then I was able to go through a leadership for ITE, Institute of Transportation Engineers, a program that really got all the up and coming engineers to really like talk about like, how do we change our profession so that it's not this very traditional approach, but it's more, just engaging the community, talking about how we can serve our communities better. Dale Bracewell from Vancouver, our city to the north, was one of my peers at we were the inaugural peer group, and we just found very, I would say that the tool that developed was a very effective way to get the message out, get feedback, and also just highlight things that are of interest, right? That people have concerns about. But then I find that the feedback that I get from users, such an important portion of how we modify, how we can improve upon, and also things that we should stop doing. And so it just becomes a amazing cycle, a virtuous cycle, in my opinion. Just things that can replicate for others, things that we should stop doing, things that we should maybe look at more closely, and then how do we as a profession continue this evolvement, get the brightest minds into the profession. So if you look at what's happening in the Institute of Transportation Engineers, you'll see very similar to what's happening with NACTO, in that there is a holistic approach. There's even, again, with ITE, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, there's planners, there are people who are building roads, there are people who are maintaining our roads, and so this organization that traditionally had been very male and white is becoming younger, more diverse, and really thinking about transit, thinking about the sustainability, the safety aspect of it, and is becoming very much a organization to join in and follow. So I think my initial approach for Washington State, and then seeing how things are happening with nationally, just I think it just tells me that that social media tool can be utilized. Not again, I think it's we're able to see some of the tools that are not just US centric now. We're able to see things that are happening in Europe. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. a lot of these tools that we want to utilize have already been deployed. We don't have to do a lot of research. We could just visit and understand how a certain design approach has been working and how we can replicate it.
I think one thing that comes through with your Twitter account is just that people see that you're someone who walks the walk, literally, and gets around on all the modes. How do you see that influencing your work compared to some of your peers in terms of actually having the actual experience of having to be a pedestrian on a street without a sidewalk, or get around on transit or with a bike?
I tell everyone that you really need to experience it on as a user, and experience it with someone you love, because that really highlights you how you might take something for granted as a able person, a confident rider, a confident walker, and then you have someone who may not walk as fast, someone who may not have all the experience that you have, and you realize that design that you're experiencing and the facility that you're experiencing could be improved upon. and certain locations, like, wow, this feels much more comfortable. We have planting strips with trees. Or letting my mom or others stroll next, and it's a great environment, to a location where, boy, there isn't a sidewalk and we're walking right next to a traveling lane, and it feels very vulnerable. You feel like, boy, this is not something that we should be replicating. You might feel okay as a user by yourself, but maybe not if you experience it with a different perspective. So I think that changes us in terms of, if you're a practitioner and you have ability to provide resources and input so that the facilities can be improved upon, boy, that's a game changer, right? And so if you're a decision maker and you're in that position, you should be able to weigh all the different perspective, and hopefully we're a better society for it, right? So I think I encourage everyone who are working on, if you're providing bus service, right, ride the bus, right? Try to take a cross town trip. Try to take a trip from Seattle down to Olympia, boy. And you see where the disconnects are, where the frequencies are so bad that maybe no one would take it, even though service is available. If you miss the peak hour and now you're in the off hour, and now you're waiting 2 hours to catch the next bus, or I think that the other aspect is that sometimes we don't even think about, which is, what if you lost some of your abilities? Maybe you don't have that vision. Maybe you're not able to see where the sidewalk is. How do you experience that, right? And so, all those things that we take for granted, sometimes if you take a more holistic approach, you understand that, some of these things that we take for granted is a huge challenge for others. And that, if we're able to make policies and organize our service delivery, it can make a huge life-changing difference. One example that I have that I think was game changer for me was just knowing how this one individual that I served up in Everett, he lived on Hoyt Avenue. His name was Scott, and he traveled down to Lighthouse of the Blind in Seattle, and did that pretty much every day. He didn't have vision, and he couldn't hear very well, and so David Miller from Lighthouse of the Blind contacted me and said, "Hey, can you help Scott navigate to get to his bus stop so they can travel?" And what I thought was a very progressive, which is, we all talk about like the big buttons, right? It's like, why do you have to push the button? And so in Seattle, we used to remove those when there was enough demand. It's like, oh, you don't have to push it, it'll come automatically. For people who have sight impairment and no vision, they need that button so that they'll know when the walk signal comes up, right? And to have a situation where there's no cues like that, and you're depending on someone to be able to cross the street, so you have a sign that says, "Help me cross the street." Incredibly vulnerable in terms of like just being able to understand how you can provide small little things like a push button that vibrates, so that that individual can know, like, okay, the walk sign is on, I can now cross. It changes their lives, right? And we don't really think about it. That curb cut that we haven't provided, it's a barrier. So someone is actually now rolling on the street with the traffic coming at them, an incredibly vulnerable feeling again. So those things are, I think we just have to, as a profession, and as individuals, as society members, raise those up. And we also need to talk about, what are the things that we value as society? And I think we don't value, again, just the voices that are not, that do not have that strong voice. And so I think that is starting to happen now. But people who depend on sidewalks, transit, we need to prioritize that, so that that those are the easiest mode to take. They are most comfortable. They're pleasant. They're the mode that most people can choose to take, and not have the barrier of vehicle being, vehicles being the barrier again. So.
Well, I'm going to get into some of the questions that our attendees have submitted. So thanks to those who did submit questions with your RSVP. Starting with kind of a similar question to what you were talking about just now, but how do you balance your professional knowledge with the lived experience of those that you serve?
So I think everyone has a unique perspective, and I learn every day from hearing from people who notice small little things that we can change. So in Seattle, when I was working with the David Miller and the Lighthouse of the Line, Rainer Avenue, MLK, 23rd, all those, really challenging streets are difficult for people who are trying to navigate if you have low vision, right? And one of the things that, that always comes up is like, if you have a skewed intersection or wide intersection, how do you make that crossing better? A lot of times it's really physical changes that needs to occur. But in the interim, there are some cues that are requested, things like tactile, and how do you point someone to the push button so that they can get there with a kin detectable marking. And so we experimented with some different approaches there. Those help us now again provide guidance nationally. So if you go to Rainier and 23rd, you'll see from the bus stop there's a plastic detectable strip on the southbound side of Rainier that takes you from the crosswalk, the curb ramp, to the bus stop. And that was our first test. Can we create a linear detectable guidance for someone who has no vision or low vision to get to the bus stop and back to the crosswalk. And then you'll also see in that intersection where the crosswalk marking is, you'll see two black strips on both sides of the crosswalks. And the two black strips have little ridges on them. And the whole idea was that if you're trying to cross on a skew intersection, you might actually veer off into the intersection. So those markings, if you're able to detect them, will keep you in line with the crosswalk. They're black because we didn't want to create a visual a cue for the drivers. It was just to test the ridges on there. So those are things that help us now be able to retrofit other locations that might be similar. I know these are small little things, right? But it has huge benefit for people who might be again. Without them, they can put themselves, in a way that that could be very difficult and challenging to get out of. So I would say that the things like additional time for crosswalks, all those things that we get requests for, they're just policy choices, right? So you just understanding what the implications are, getting some data to see how effective they are, and if they're effective, how do you replicate it so that it's more systemic, and then that you could deploy it throughout the city. Seattle DOT with the leading pedestrian intervals, the Vision Zero team really took that to charge and said, okay, let's implement these at these locations, see what the data shows. And it showed huge benefit. The costs were modest, and now it's deployed pretty much any location that signal timing is changed. So it has a big implication in terms of accessibility, safety, but minimal in terms of impact to traveling public again. So I think just testing things out, getting the data, and then providing a rationale for that tool is effective is really critical.
The next question, how can cities make the area around schools safer for kids walking and biking to school?
Oh my goodness. I think that has to be our first thing, right? So kids going to school is everyday occurrence. And I think a lot of times we tend to focus on small little things like sidewalks, but it's that whole environment, the whole walking environment. So first thing is like where schools are located. We have to make sure that we are locating schools where people it's a walking route, right? So again, make them accessible, make those crossing the big arterials, make those easy and convenient and safe. At the school itself and the property, working with the school district and the school themselves, making sure that kids who are and families who are walking and biking have the least the safest and the most direct route into the school. I think the School Street is a great tool that came out of the COVID experiment and having our Stay Healthy Street approach. I think that's a great tool as well for all schools. When the school's in session, close that front entry off so that it's really prioritizing people who are walking and biking. And then I think speed around schools is really critical as well. And so we, I think, have really prioritized driving and people dropping off as a priority mode in the past. We need to get away from that. We need to say, if you're driving, you know, we want to make driving possible, but for the majority of people who are getting to school, we want that experience to be most convenient if you're walking or biking. So improving flexibility for school speed zones, I think is important. Right now, the state law is very restrictive. It's right at the school property and then at the crosswalk where the school is located. I think again, it needs to expand so that it encompasses where the kids are walking, where the students are getting to the school, and have ability for traffic calming. Again, I think that's a pretty critical safety tool, and then prioritizing that walking experience so that there's a safe walking sidewalk and walking environment for students.
I think this next question sort of gets at how people have access to those interventions that you're just talking about. I think a lot of people think that, find that there are a lot of barriers to getting those changes made. The question is, what's the most effective way for people who want improvements in their neighborhood to get them done?
Well, I know in Seattle, there's a pretty streamlined team that's working on school access routes. I think in other communities, it might be a bit more challenging. Again, they might not have the resources or the staff to be able to direct. And we see that in our Safe Route to School funding applications at the state level. There's a lot of demand, but not enough funding to provide. So I think the biggest thing we can do is to have that highlighted for our legislature so that we can get the resources and funding for communities and schools that want to make improvements. The other is to work with your local Department of Transportation, so your city or county Department of Transportation to prioritize and make a plan. What is the school walk route? What are the tools that can be utilized? What are some of the barriers where it might not be an option? And then what are the alternatives? So developing all those is pretty important. I think the toolbox is pretty defined. So we know what works. We know that when you have a crosswalk and if you raise it, it has a huge impact to accessibility, and so people who are encountering that crosswalk will slow down every time, right? So those are pretty effective engineering solutions that's going to have the desired results. So concentrating on those, I think, is really critical.
Something you touched on earlier a little bit, this question, what role do you think that WSDOT traffic engineers like yourself play in achieving our climate goals?
I think we have a huge role. We provide guidance for a lot of projects in our state, so all the state highways, right? And I would say the profession itself, right? We also have a huge role to change that some of the paradigm. So yeah, I think that the design approaches, the how we analyze for that for the configuration that we want to achieve. A lot of times we've been focused on level of service, which would dictate vehicle delay, which would dictate capacity improvements, which would dictate a lot of widening, all those things. I think the paradigm is changing to more of a practical solutions, and that some delays are fine, right? That we want to handle safe speeds and be able to have a affordable approach to transportation. Make sure the goods deliveries are reliable. So I think the paradigm for transportation engineers and paradigms really really think about the right metrics. What is the outcome, and then long term is how can we get to that sustainable transportation system that we all need to strive for. Again, it's the more we drive, I would say, and the way that the policies are set up, again, it's really to highlight to our electeds and our policymakers that putting, I would say, funding our transportation system so that it relies on use, I think is a wrong choice. That we should be driving the outcome so that we're getting the land use and the mode that we want to achieve long term, which is compact development, sustainable development, affordable housing, all those things that make a great environment for people. And then we also need to make sure that we are, as professional transportation engineers, looking at how goods deliveries are made in a cost-effective way, right? So just thinking about like how do we look at deliveries, through distributed methods, right? Things like bike deliveries, cargo deliveries. Are there ways to reduce the travel that's necessary so that capacity is available? Things like again, remote work and broadband, and so it just helping with that approach when we're thinking about new projects.
Someone else asks, how do you see the role of WSDOT, a state DOT, evolving, particularly along corridors that pass through urban areas and even rural towns, downtowns?
Again, I'm fairly new, so I don't have all the policy background, but I would say that personally, I feel like there needs to be a partnership with the jurisdictions and if you're going to a small rural town, what I hear from the community is that they would like their town to feel like a town, that they don't want vehicles and drivers to be speeding through. And so in that context, places like Leavenworth, Salton, Monroe's, and what we really want to achieve is a ability for commerce to thrive, but people still be able to get to the destination. So it's that approach of how do we create a great streetscape that still has mobility aspect of what the streets should have, but again, those tools so that we can get the safe systems approach. One of the big things that the tools that I think we have with our intersection is in the past I have really thought about, like, how do you influence so that a driver knows that you got to a destination, right? It's a small little town that may not really register as a driver, and it's really at the intersections and thinking about, like, how do you create a gateway? And a lot of times, one of the tools that WSDOT has been really leaders nationally is to use roundabouts as a practical solution, long-term solution for intersection control. What that does, as a driver, when you're coming to that intersection, you're slowing down to the design speed of the roundabout. So it's again, the capacity of the roundabout is the wide node, and so you're able to handle the vehicle volumes through there. And then interaction with pedestrians at a roundabout, again, it occurs at a really low speed and at one crossing location. So sustainability wise and safety wise, it's been proven to be very effective. one of the things that I think we need to work more on is the accessibility for the crossing itself. So, and then how we integrate pedestrians and bikes better in the roundabout.
So I want to save a question here to the end. Someone asked, how do you feel about having, did you ever feel like you, I'm sorry, I didn't get the question right. Yeah, did you ever expect to get a day named after you? And the city?
No, I did not. I felt so lucky to have served at the city of Seattle. I think I can't even fathom having that kind of recognition. So no, I did not. I just felt so privileged to work in Seattle, to do my job, and to have that kind of honor. I think, yeah. So I'm so I feel so lucky.
I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on your successor, or just sort of how, you know, the legacy that you leave behind at the city after almost 10 full years. So,
you know, Seattle DOT is a team of people. There's so many great, you know, Ryan, having interacted with the SDOT team, everyone cares, truly cares about the community. And I would say that Venu, who I was very lucky to have worked with, and I've interacted, and now I still meet on a regular basis with Venu. Incredible professional, cares deeply about his job and how he serves the community. I feel the city is in really good position. And some of the things that we're working together now is, how we can deploy some of these tools that we learned more broadly to the state. So I'm learning again from Venu and others and from SDOT, and putting those tools into what we have for the state. So we have a traffic manual. We're going to be looking to update the METCD. So I'll be working with our federal partners on the adoption process. We want to amend some of the existing so that we have the tools available right now before the new METCD is published. But use those tools we know that are effective, make it broadly available. And again, it's the just the holistic approach of tools that are effective, target speeds and survivable speeds, crossings, and creating crossings that are provide safe traffic controls at locations, especially on state highways that tend to be very difficult with higher speeds and multiple lanes.
I think that's about all the time for questions we have. I want to thank Dongho so much for taking time to talk with us tonight. I'm gonna let Dongho say any final words to our guests tonight.
So I would say that you all are huge influence on what happens in your community. Advocate for those things that really are important to accessibility, and advocate for people who don't have the voice, and elevate our society so that we are again a truly accessible, affordable, and safe, and place that people are proud of. I know Lee was here. There you are, Lee. I see. I really appreciate all the things that you're doing. Again, it highlights to all the things that we need to work together on, and I appreciate. I know it takes time. That's the part of the frustration, but we'll get to it. We'll get it.
Thanks so much for joining us. Really, we know that you're here because you care about these issues. And the Urbanist is putting out content every day on on all these topics. And your support is what makes that possible. So thanks so much. Doug, do you have any final words?
Just happy holidays, everyone. And yeah, I just really appreciate the community that's really grown around these issues, and Dongho is a big part of that, going back many years. So thanks for joining us, Dongho, and just enjoy the community that the holiday season kind of brings together, and we'll keep fighting to get more of these changes and to make it easier to get around Seattle safely. Thanks, and have a happy holidays.
Thank you, everyone.